Call it, one of the alien observers said without looking up from the glowing display. The human is done. Ryan Walker heard the words even through the pounding of his own heartbeat, and for a brief second, he almost believed them. Every breath scraped through his chest like cold winter air back home in Montana. His legs felt twice their normal weight, and the rocky trail beneath his boots seemed determined to pull him backward one step at a time. The gravity on Orpheus 9 measured 1.7 times Earth's, turning every movement into work that would leave even experienced explorers gasping. Ahead of him, sleek alien volunteers from half a dozen advanced civilizations had already crossed the finish line. Some looked back with quiet amusement. Others simply shook their heads, convinced humanity's reputation for persistence had been exaggerated. High above the course, inside a glass observation deck overlooking the canyon, Dr. Salvaris folded all four hands behind his back as streams of biological data floated around him. Heart rate exceeding predicted limits, one assistant reported. Muscle fatigue at 98%. Oxygen utilization collapsing. Salvaris gave a calm nod. Exactly as expected. Human endurance depends on inefficient muscular output. He has reached terminal exhaustion. Around him, graduate researchers entered notes into their tablets without hesitation. They had spent years studying hundreds of intelligent species across known space. Every model they had ever built agreed on one conclusion. Once the body crossed this threshold, recovery was impossible without rest. Down below, Ryan stumbled hard enough to catch himself with one hand against a boulder. Dust clung to his sleeve as he stayed there for a second, head hanging. His radio crackled. "Ryan," came the familiar voice of Maya Brooks, the human logistics coordinator monitoring the exercise. "You don't have to prove anything. You can stop." Ryan managed a tired smile nobody could see. "If I stop every time somebody says I should, my dad would have been right about me years ago." Maya sighed softly. "You're impossible. That's not what my mom calls it." A few quiet laughs escaped the control trailer, but inside the alien observation room, no one smiled. They saw only numbers, and the numbers were clear. One researcher highlighted the prediction in bright blue. Estimated collapse, 18 seconds. Salvaris glanced toward the canyon below. "Prepare the medical response team. We should be ready before he loses consciousness." The drones lifted from their charging stations, hovering silently over the trail. Ryan noticed them from the corner of his eye and chuckled under his breath. "Little early for the rescue parade," he muttered. His vision blurred for a moment. The world narrowed until all he could hear was his breathing and the crunch of gravel beneath his boots. He thought about home, about the long wildfire seasons where quitting had never been an option because somebody's family was always waiting beyond the flames. He remembered his father telling him something after a 16-hour shift hauling fallen timber. "Your body lies before your heart does." Ryan had rolled his eyes back then. Now those words drifted through his mind with surprising clarity. 10 feet. Then another 10. Every muscle begged him to stop, but something inside refused to listen. Above the canyon, alarms suddenly flickered across several monitoring screens. One assistant frowned. "Doctor, his oxygen uptake is increasing." Another looked up from her console. "That can't be right." Salvaris stepped closer, his expression tightening for the first time all day. "Recalibrate every sensor." "Already did." "Then explain why every indicator says the human is recovering." Down on the trail, Ryan slowly lifted his head, drew one deep breath that somehow felt cleaner than every breath before it, and without understanding why, he started running. Ryan did not remember crossing the finish marker. One moment he was running through air that suddenly felt lighter than it had any right to, and the next he was standing with his hands on his knees while the recovery drones circled him in confused silence. The digital timer stopped. Nobody applauded. Nobody even spoke. Every eye inside the observation deck stayed fixed on the impossible stream of numbers scrolling across their displays. Dr. Salvaris finally broke the silence. "Bring Mr. Walker inside." Two attendants approached Ryan carrying a portable scanner. One of them, a tall amphibious technician named Lauren, looked genuinely puzzled. "You should not be standing." Ryan let out a tired laugh. "That is funny, because standing is about all I feel like doing." Maya hurried across the platform carrying a bottle of water. "Ryan." She handed it to him before lowering her voice. "You scared everybody." He took a long drink before answering. "Trust me, I scared myself." The walk to the medical laboratory was only a few hundred feet, but Ryan could already feel the strange burst of energy beginning to settle. His breathing remained steady, yet the heaviness slowly returned to his legs. It felt familiar. He had experienced it before during long rescue shifts, mountain hikes, and endless hours fighting wildfires. The feeling always came without warning, stayed just long enough to finish the job, and disappeared before he could ever explain it. Inside Laboratory 7, bright white lights reflected from polished walls filled with equipment built by civilizations thousands of years older than Earth. Ryan sat on the examination table while several scanning rings rotated around him. Tiny holographic windows opened in every direction, displaying muscle density, blood chemistry, neural activity, and dozens of biological measurements he could not even pronounce. Dr. Salvaris watched each screen without blinking. Run the comparison against his baseline. One assistant frowned almost immediately. Already completed. And everything matches. Salvaris turned toward the display himself. No genetic enhancement. None. Chemical stimulants. Negative. Implanted support systems? Negative. Ryan looked up from the edge of the table. You guys always talk about people like they are broken engines? One of the younger researchers looked embarrassed. We are trying to understand what happened. Ryan shrugged. Join the club. Salvaris stepped closer. Have you experienced this before? Ryan thought for a moment. Not exactly like today, but close enough. Explain. He rubbed the back of his neck before answering. Back home, I worked wildfire search and rescue before I signed on with the coalition maintenance crews. Sometimes you would spend 14 or 15 hours climbing hills carrying equipment that weighed almost 70 pounds. You would hit a point where you figured there was nothing left. Then somehow you kept moving anyway. The researchers quickly entered every word into their records. Salvaris remained completely still. Did your physicians diagnose this condition? Ryan blinked. Condition? The recovery event. Ryan smiled. No, doctor. We have a saying for it. What saying? Ryan twisted the cap back onto his water bottle and answered as naturally as if he were talking to old friends around a campfire. You catch your second wind. The laboratory fell quiet again. Several translators paused as they searched for an equivalent phrase across thousands of known languages. None existed. One assistant finally spoke. There is no biological definition for those words when combined. Ryan laughed softly. Yeah, we never really treated it like science. It is just something people talk about. Salvaris looked back toward the floating scans. Every measurable system insisted the human body had crossed complete exhaustion before reversing course without medical intervention. The equations were correct. The instruments were functioning perfectly, yet the conclusion refused to make sense. For the first time in his long career, the most respected comparative biologist in the Galactic Union realized the problem was not the data. The problem was that every assumption behind the data had been built without truly understanding how humans survived. Dr. Salvaris canceled the remainder of the endurance trials before anyone else could object. That decision alone sent whispers through the research station. In 12 years, he had never interrupted an experiment because the numbers had always behaved exactly as science predicted. This time, science had blinked first. Ryan sat in a quiet observation room with a warm cup of coffee that Maya somehow managed to convince the cafeteria staff to brew using actual Terran beans instead of the synthetic blends served on the station. He wrapped both hands around the mug and smiled after the first sip. Now that tastes like home. Maya leaned against the wall. You know half the station is talking about you. Ryan shrugged. Hopefully for something less embarrassing than the way I almost tripped over that rock. Trust me, nobody remembers the rock. A soft chime sounded outside the door before Dr. Salvaris entered carrying a slim data tablet. His expression remained calm, but Ryan noticed something different. The confidence was still there, yet now it was mixed with genuine curiosity. Mr. Walker, Salvaris said, taking a seat across from him. Would you be willing to repeat today's exercise tomorrow? Ryan nearly laughed into his coffee. Tomorrow? Yes. Doctor, I can barely feel my legs right now. Exactly. Ryan looked over at Maya before answering. You people really do not know many humans, do you? Salvaris tilted his head slightly. Explain. Tomorrow is when my body reminds me what I did today. Maya smiled knowingly. He is telling the truth. Salvaris opened the tablet and enlarged several medical charts. Every measurable indicator suggests you should have experienced complete muscular failure before reaching the final quarter mile. Ryan nodded. Sounds about right. Then why did you continue? Ryan thought for several seconds before answering. Because stopping never crossed my mind. The room became quiet again. Salvaris searched Ryan's face as though expecting a more complicated explanation. You experienced no fear of permanent injury? Ryan took another sip of coffee before answering. Of course I did. Anybody who says they are never scared is either lying or selling something. Then why proceed? Ryan rested the mug on the table. Because I signed up knowing it would be hard. You finish what you start whenever you can. Salvaris entered another note. Interesting. Ryan smiled. That is not science, doctor. That is just how a lot of us were raised. Later that afternoon, the research team gathered inside the central conference hall. 3 enormous holographic displays floated above the room, replaying every second of Ryan's performance from different angles. Researchers slowed the footage frame by frame, comparing his posture, stride length, oxygen exchange, and heart rhythm before and after the unexplained recovery. Every calculation produced the same impossible graph. One young scientist finally spoke. Perhaps humans possess an emergency biological reserve that activates under specific conditions. Another immediately shook her head. If that were true, our previous studies should have detected it. Unless, a third researcher added quietly, we have never observed humans long enough to reach that point. Salvaris remained silent while listening to every theory. Finally, he enlarged one particular image showing Ryan lowering his head moments before his recovery. Notice this moment, he said. No medication, no external assistance, no environmental change. Another researcher answered, nothing changes. Salvaris looked back at the frozen image. No, something changes. He pointed directly at Ryan's posture. The human makes a decision before the body responds. The room fell completely still. That possibility had never appeared in any biological model used by the Galactic Union. Their equations assumed the body directed behavior. They had never seriously considered that determination itself could influence physical performance in measurable ways. Down the hallway, completely unaware of the debate unfolding around him, Ryan sat on an observation balcony, watching the orange sun sink behind the distant mountains of Orpheus 9. He stretched his sore legs, smiled to himself, and quietly wondered whether his mother would believe any of this if he ever found the time to call home. The following morning, Ryan woke before the station lights shifted into daytime mode, mostly because every muscle in his body had filed a formal complaint overnight. He sat on the edge of the small apartment bed, rubbing the stiffness from his shoulders before letting out a quiet groan. There you are, he muttered to himself. I was wondering when you would show up. A soft knock came from the door. Maya stepped inside carrying 2 paper cups. Coffee, she announced. And before you ask, yes. I had to argue with 3 nutrition specialists who insisted you should be drinking electrolyte supplements instead. Ryan accepted the cup with a grateful smile. You just saved my morning. She looked him over. How bad? About what I expected. Every step reminds me yesterday actually happened. Maya laughed. Good. Because Dr. Salvaris has another surprise waiting downstairs. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Please tell me it is breakfast. Not exactly. 20 minutes later, Ryan entered the primary physiology laboratory, where nearly every researcher on the station had gathered around a massive circular platform. New equipment surrounded the room, including motion scanners, neural mapping arrays, and atmospheric analyzers borrowed from neighboring departments. It looked less like a medical examination and more like an engineering convention. Ryan slowly looked around before smiling. Either I became famous overnight, or somebody really likes expensive gadgets. A few researchers exchanged embarrassed glances. Dr. Salvaris approached, carrying another tablet. We intend to isolate every variable involved in yesterday's event. Ryan nodded toward the equipment. With all this? With all of this? Doctor, yesterday I almost passed out running uphill. Precisely. Ryan could not help laughing. You aliens really know how to make a guy feel special. The testing began with simple measurements. Ryan walked across pressure-sensitive flooring while scanners tracked every joint movement. He climbed a staircase, carrying weighted packs ranging from 20 pounds to 80 pounds. He squeezed grip sensors until his forearms trembled. Blood samples were analyzed almost instantly. Brain activity was monitored in real time. Hours passed. Every result matched previous human medical records almost perfectly. One assistant finally looked up from her display. Everything is completely ordinary. Another researcher sounded disappointed. There is no measurable anomaly. Salvaris folded his arms. Then why did an ordinary human produce an extraordinary outcome? Nobody answered. Ryan finished another walking trial before lowering the weight vest onto a bench. Can I ask you something? Salvaris nodded. Of course. Have any of you actually worked beside humans before this project? The researchers exchanged uncertain looks. Finally, one admitted, only through recorded studies. Ryan smiled gently. That explains a lot. Salvaris tilted his head. Explain. Ryan sat down to catch his breath. You keep looking for the thing that makes us different. Maybe you should spend more time looking at all the things we think are normal. Maya nodded from the corner of the room. He has a point. Ryan continued. Back home, nobody throws a party because somebody finishes a long shift. Construction workers do it every day. Firefighters do it. Nurses work through the night. Parents stay awake with sick kids for days if they have to. We complain about it, sure, but we keep going. The room became noticeably quieter. One researcher slowly lowered her tablet. You are suggesting this is not unusual among your species? Ryan shrugged. Not really. Some people can push farther than others. But most of us have had moments where we thought we were completely out of gas and somehow found enough to finish what mattered. Salvaris remained perfectly still as he processed every word. The laboratory had been built around one assumption that suddenly seemed fragile. They believed Ryan was the exception. For the first time, another possibility entered the room like an unwelcome guest. What if he was not exceptional at all? What if the real mistake was believing that human endurance could be understood inside a laboratory without first understanding the ordinary lives that shaped it? By the third day, the story had spread far beyond Orpheus 9. Research stations from neighboring sectors began requesting copies of Ryan Walker's medical data, and every request received exactly the same reply from Dr. Salvaris. Access denied pending verification. It was not because he wanted to hide the results. It was because he no longer trusted his own conclusions. Ryan, meanwhile, was back where everyone expected him to be, tightening access panels beneath a cooling system with a wrench in one hand and a flashlight balanced on his shoulder. He preferred fixing machines to answering questions. Machines usually told you what was wrong. People rarely did. As he climbed down from the maintenance ladder, Maya walked into the corridor, holding another message pad. Guess who wants to see you again? Ryan smiled without looking up. If you say Dr. Salvaris, I am going to start charging him consulting fees. He actually mentioned that. Ryan laughed. He was joking. Maya tilted her head. I am not completely sure he was. Inside the laboratory, Salvaris stood beside a wall-sized projection displaying hundreds of human medical records gathered from hospitals, military archives, athletic organizations, and civilian rescue agencies across Earth. Ryan stared at the endless columns of information. That is, a lot of paperwork. Salvaris answered without taking his eyes off the display. Your people generate extraordinary quantities of documentation. You should see tax season. Even Salvaris seemed to pause for a second before deciding whether Ryan was serious. Your humor continues to complicate my analysis. Ryan grinned. Welcome to humanity. Salvaris expanded several files across the screen. We searched for individuals matching your physiological profile. We found firefighters completing rescue operations after measurable exhaustion. Marathon runners increasing pace during the final mile. Parents remaining awake for prolonged periods while caring for ill children. Mountain rescue teams continuing despite significant muscular fatigue. Ryan nodded slowly. Sounds about right. Every case describes similar subjective experiences using different language. Salvaris highlighted a series of phrases. Hit the wall. Dig deep. Keep pushing. Find another gear. Catch your second wind. Ryan folded his arms and quietly smiled. Those all mean about the same thing. Yet none of them identify a distinct biological mechanism. Because nobody really thinks about it that way. Salvaris finally turned toward him. That is precisely what confuses us. Ryan leaned against the table. Doctor, when you grow up around something your whole life, you stop noticing how unusual it might look to somebody else. Salvaris considered the answer for several seconds. Then humanity has underestimated itself. Ryan shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe we just stay busy. Before Salvaris could respond, A sharp electronic tone echoed through the laboratory. Every display suddenly shifted to yellow. One researcher quickly checked the station network. Environmental systems are reporting unstable seismic readings beneath Sector 12. Another looked confused. The mining teams were not scheduled to be operating today. Salvaris frowned. Could this be an equipment malfunction? Unknown. Ryan looked toward the ceiling as though listening to something no sensor had yet detected. Years spent working around heavy machinery had taught him that buildings often spoke before they failed. A faint vibration traveled through the floor beneath his boots, so subtle that nobody else seemed to notice. He looked back at Maya. Did you feel that? She frowned. Feel what? Ryan remained still for another moment before quietly setting his coffee on the nearest table. I hope I am wrong, he said, but I think something underneath this station just changed. Around the room, the researchers continued studying graphs and probabilities, unaware that for the first time since arriving on Orpheus 9, the next challenge would not come from a laboratory test or a medical scanner. It would come from the station itself. The vibration returned 3 seconds later, stronger this time, just enough to send a faint ripple across the surface of Ryan's untouched coffee. He pointed at the cup without saying a word. Maya looked down and watched the liquid tremble in small, steady circles. Her smile disappeared. Okay, she whispered. I felt that one. Across the laboratory, the warning tone shifted from yellow to orange. A station-wide announcement echoed through the ceiling speakers. Attention, all personnel. Engineering teams are investigating an unexpected structural resonance beneath Sector 12. Please remain at your assigned stations until further notice. Several researchers relaxed after hearing the calm, automated voice. Ryan did not. Calm announcements usually meant somebody was trying to prevent panic before they understood the problem. He looked toward the nearest structural support beam. Another vibration traveled through the floor, lasting only a second, but this one carried a low metallic groan that reminded him of old bridge cables stretching during spring floods back on Earth. He had heard that sound before. Never ignore a structure when it starts talking. Dr. Salvaris noticed Ryan staring toward the ceiling. You believe this is more serious than the system indicates? Ryan nodded slowly. I cannot prove it. Then why are you concerned? Because machines almost never whisper before they fail. Buildings do. Several alien researchers exchanged uncertain looks. One quietly replied, structural monitoring systems have detected no critical damage. Ryan answered without raising his voice. Good. I hope they stay right. Before anyone could continue, the laboratory lights flickered once. Then again, the holographic displays vanished for half a second before returning. This time nobody dismissed it. An engineering officer suddenly appeared on the main communication screen, breathing harder than before. Attention! We are isolating multiple power fluctuations across the lower maintenance tunnels. Civilian personnel should prepare for controlled evacuation if instructed. Maya looked at Ryan. Controlled evacuation never sounds comforting. Ryan gave a tired smile. No, it usually means they are hoping they do not need one. Dr. Salvaris tapped several commands across his tablet. Engineering reports indicate a geothermal pressure shift beneath the station's western foundation. Ryan frowned. How old is this place? Approximately 180 standard years. Ryan nodded. Old enough to have surprises. The room shook again, this time long enough for ceiling lights to sway gently overhead. Nothing broke. Nothing collapsed. Yet every conversation stopped instantly. One young researcher instinctively stepped away from the windows. Another stared at the exit without realizing it. Ryan recognized those expressions immediately. They were not panic. They were uncertainty, the moment people stopped trusting the ground beneath them. He stood up before anyone asked him to. Where are your maintenance access maps? Salvaris looked surprised. You intend to assist engineering? Ryan shrugged. I fix infrastructure for a living. Sitting here worrying is not really my strongest skill. Maya folded her arms. That is probably the most honest thing you have said all week. A technician projected the station blueprint across the center of the room. Ryan studied it for only a few seconds before pointing toward a cluster of service corridors beneath Sector 12. If something shifted down here, every load gets transferred through these support channels. The technician blinked. How did you determine that so quickly? Ryan smiled. Because whoever built this station thinks like every construction foreman I have ever worked for. Fancy outside, practical underneath. Dr. Salvaris watched Ryan with growing fascination. Just days earlier, he had viewed the human as an average maintenance worker participating in a biological study. Now he realized something equally important. Human experience itself was becoming a variable his equations had never considered. Knowledge earned through ordinary jobs, ordinary mistakes, and ordinary years could not be measured by scanners alone. Another alarm suddenly echoed through the corridor, louder than every warning before it. This time the calm, automated voice was gone. Instead, a live dispatcher spoke with careful urgency. Engineering response teams report multiple access routes into Sector 12 are no longer operational. All available maintenance specialists are requested to report immediately. Ryan was already walking toward the door before the announcement finished. He glanced back only once. "Doctor," he said quietly, "I think your experiment just became real." Ryan reached the maintenance corridor before most of the emergency crews. Years of working in places where every minute mattered had taught him one simple habit. Get moving first. Figure things out while you are moving. The hallway lights flashed between white and amber as engineers hurried in every direction carrying diagnostic cases and portable scanners. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was running. But everyone had the same tight look that appeared whenever experienced professionals realized the problem was growing faster than the answers. A gray-haired human supervisor named Linda Chavez spotted Ryan the moment he rounded the corner. "Walker." She pointed toward a large station map floating over a portable console. "Good timing. We lost remote access to 3 stabilization nodes. If we cannot get them back online, we have to evacuate half the research wing." Ryan stepped closer. "How many people are still inside?" "About 200, maybe more. Most of them are scientists." Ryan studied the layout for several seconds before tracing one maintenance route with his finger. "This access tunnel's still open." Linda nodded. "Barely. Then that is our way in." An alien engineer immediately shook his head. "That corridor exceeds recommended vibration tolerance. Entering would violate every union safety protocol." Ryan looked at him calmly. "Staying here does not fix the problem." Before anyone could argue further, another low rumble rolled beneath their feet. Dust drifted from an overhead vent while several lights flickered again. Linda grabbed her radio. "Engineering Team 3, status." Static answered first. Then a strained voice broke through. "Control, this is Team 3. We reached the lower junction, but the main service doors will not cycle. We are locked out." Ryan quietly asked, "Manual override?" Inside the compartment, the radio answered. "We cannot reach it." Ryan looked at the map once more. "There is another entrance." Linda frowned. "That route was abandoned years ago." "Exactly." She followed his finger across the blueprint before her eyes widened. "Nobody uses those maintenance shafts anymore." Ryan smiled. "Which means nobody thought to lock them." Maya finally caught up, slightly out of breath. "Please tell me you are not volunteering." Ryan looked at her with the same tired grin she had already learned to recognize. "I think I already did." She sighed. "I was afraid you were going to say that." Dr. Salvaris arrived moments later, accompanied by several researchers carrying portable scanners. "Mr. Walker," he said, "your physical condition remains compromised from previous testing." Ryan adjusted the tool belt someone had handed him. "Doctor, every construction worker over 40 wakes up compromised." Linda laughed despite the tension. Even Salvaris almost smiled. "Your species continues to employ humor under unusual circumstances." Ryan clipped a flashlight onto his jacket. "Helps keep your hands steady." They entered the forgotten maintenance tunnel together, moving beneath the main research complex through narrow service passages lined with old utility pipes and support beams that had not been inspected in decades. The deeper they walked, the quieter everyone became. Ryan occasionally reached out to touch a wall or paused to listen for several seconds before continuing. One young alien technician finally asked, "What are you hearing?" Ryan answered without slowing down. "Changes." "That is not specific." "No," Ryan admitted. "It is not. But old buildings have patterns. When those patterns change, you pay attention." A few minutes later, they reached a massive sealed maintenance hatch coated in years of dust. Ryan brushed the faded warning label clean with one sleeve and smiled. "There you are." Linda stepped beside him. "You really think this still works?" Ryan examined the heavy mechanical release wheel instead of the electronic controls. "Maybe. Whoever built this place was smart enough to give people a backup." He wrapped both hands around the wheel and pulled. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a deep metallic groan that echoed through the tunnel, the old mechanism slowly began to move while every researcher watched in complete silence, realizing that the forgotten solution they needed had not come from advanced technology at all, but from an ordinary human maintenance worker who knew that sometimes the oldest door was the one nobody else remembered to open. The rusted maintenance hatch swung open just far enough for one person to squeeze through, releasing a rush of cool air that smelled of old metal and untouched machinery. Ryan grabbed his flashlight and stepped inside without hesitation. Linda followed close behind while Maya and Dr. Salvaris remained near the entrance with the engineering team. The forgotten service tunnel stretched ahead for nearly 200 yards, its walls lined with aging support conduits that had not appeared on modern station maps for decades. Dust covered everything, untouched by maintenance drones that had long ago been rerouted to newer systems. Ryan ran his hand along one of the steel beams as he walked. "Still solid," he murmured. Linda glanced at him. "You can tell just by touching it." Ryan smiled. "Not perfectly, but after enough years, you learn what healthy metal feels like." They reached the manual control chamber where 3 enormous mechanical locking wheels stood beside a silent emergency power junction. Every digital display in the room was dark. Linda stared at the inactive panel. Engineering was right. There is no power. Ryan knelt beside the housing, removed the protective cover with a simple wrench, and studied the gears inside. "Good," he said. Linda looked confused. "Good. No electricity means fewer things to troubleshoot." She laughed despite herself. "You really are different." Ryan shook his head. "No, I just spent too many years fixing equipment nobody else wanted to touch." Above them, another vibration rolled through the station. Dust drifted from the ceiling as the emergency lights briefly dimmed. Maya's voice crackled over the radio. "Ryan, structural movement is increasing across Sector 12. Engineering says we have maybe 15 minutes before they begin a full evacuation." Ryan answered calmly while examining the mechanism. "Tell them to wait." Dr. Salvaris came over the channel next. "On what basis?" Ryan rotated one of the gears by hand until it clicked into alignment. "Because I think we can still stabilize it." "Think?" Salvaris asked. Ryan smiled to himself. "Doctor, maintenance is usually educated guessing followed by hard work." He slid a heavy locking bar into position and motioned for Linda. "Help me with this." Together they leaned against the oversized wheel. At first it refused to move. Years of neglect held every component firmly in place. Ryan took one slow breath, adjusted his footing, and pushed again. Every muscle in his back and shoulders protested immediately. Linda noticed. "Ryan, you do not look so good." "I have had better Tuesdays," he admitted with a grin. The wheel finally shifted with a deep metallic pop before beginning to rotate inch by inch. Far above them, lights throughout the research wing stopped flickering. One engineer monitoring the station from the control room suddenly shouted over the radio. "Structural load is dropping." Another voice followed almost instantly. "Secondary support network is coming online. Dr." Salvaris stared at the live readings flooding across his tablet. Every stabilization graph that had been climbing toward failure suddenly leveled out. He looked at the biological monitor attached to Ryan's wrist. Once again, the human's physical data made no sense. After hours of testing, little sleep, and sustained physical effort, every prediction indicated he should already be incapable of meaningful exertion. Instead, his heart rhythm steadied. His breathing became more efficient. His oxygen utilization climbed exactly as it had during the endurance trial. Salvaris quietly whispered to himself, "It is happening again." Ryan could not hear him. He was too busy finishing the final rotation until the emergency lock engaged with a heavy mechanical click. Moments later, the entire maintenance corridor hummed softly as dormant systems awakened one section after another. Linda looked at the restored control lights, then back at Ryan. "You just brought half the station back online." Ryan sat down on the floor, breathing hard, but smiling anyway. "No," he said between steady breaths. "The people who built this place did. I just remembered to trust what they left behind." Standing outside the tunnel entrance, Dr. Salvaris lowered his tablet for the first time since meeting Ryan Walker because the graphs no longer interested him nearly as much as the quiet human sitting on the floor who had once again done exactly what every equation had insisted was impossible. 3 months later, Orpheus 9 looked exactly the way it always had. Cargo shuttles landed on schedule. Research teams hurried through bright corridors carrying tablets and sample cases. Maintenance crews complained about impossible repair requests over their radios. Life had returned to normal, at least on the surface. Ryan Walker preferred it that way. He was back inside a service tunnel replacing a worn pressure valve when Maya leaned around the corner with a familiar smile. I had a feeling I would find you under something covered in grease. Ryan tightened the final bolt before climbing down from the ladder. You found me. What is the emergency? Dr. Salvaris wants 5 minutes. Ryan sighed dramatically. 5 scientist minutes or 5 real minutes? Definitely scientist minutes. Ryan laughed and followed her toward the administration wing. When they entered Salvaris's office, the walls were no longer covered with charts measuring only muscles, oxygen levels, and metabolic rates. Instead, new displays compared human psychology, long-term adaptation, occupational experience, family structures, social cooperation, and resilience under prolonged stress. Ryan noticed one title projected across the center wall: Human Adaptive Endurance Response. He smiled. That sounds much fancier than anything I would have called it. Salvaris stood quietly for a moment before speaking. It is now a required area of study for every comparative biology program within the Galactic Union. Ryan blinked. Because of one maintenance worker? Salvaris slowly shook his head. No, because of one misunderstanding. He walked toward the largest display and deactivated every graph until only a single sentence remained. We believed endurance belonged only to the body. Ryan looked at the screen without saying anything. Salvaris continued. We now understand that, for humans, purpose frequently outlasts physical comfort. Your species often continues because stopping would betray something more important than pain. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Doctor, I think you are giving us too much credit. Am I? Ryan looked toward the window overlooking the station. Where I come from, people do things like that every day. Parents work 2 jobs because their kids need school supplies. Nurses finish another shift because somebody still needs care. Farmers keep going when the weather refuses to cooperate. Construction crews rebuild after storms. Nobody calls it extraordinary. It is just life. Salvaris remained silent for several seconds before replying. Perhaps that is exactly why we failed to understand your species. We search for heroes while overlooking ordinary people. Ryan smiled softly. Most heroes are ordinary people until life asks them a difficult question. A week later, Ryan packed the few belongings he had brought from Earth into a single duffel bag. His contract on Orpheus 9 had ended, and another maintenance assignment waited on a transport heading toward the outer colonies. Maya walked beside him through the docking bay. You know, she said, you could stay here. Half the research division would probably name a laboratory after you. Ryan laughed. Please do not let them do that. Why not? He looked around at mechanics loading equipment, pilots checking flight plans, and families saying quiet goodbyes before departures. Because somebody else is going to need the maintenance guy on the next station. Maya smiled, then gave him a quick hug before stepping back. Try not to accidentally rewrite another science textbook. Ryan picked up his bag. No promises. As the transport lifted away from Orpheus 9, Dr. Salvaris stood alone inside the observation deck, watching the small ship disappear into the stars. On his desk rested the final page of a report that would be archived in every major scientific institution across the Galactic Union. The last paragraph contained no equations, no graphs, and no technical language. It simply read, never assume a human has reached the end simply because your instruments say there is nothing left. There are forces that cannot be measured by numbers alone. Duty, hope, love, responsibility, experience. These are invisible until the moment they carry someone farther than anyone believed possible. And somewhere beyond the station, Ryan Walker was already drinking another cup of coffee, heading toward another ordinary job, completely unaware that the greatest lesson he had ever taught the galaxy was not how strong humans could become, but how quietly ordinary people choose to keep going when the world believes they have already given everything they have.